Hi, I'm Martin Verhiniak. In this tutorial, I will show you how to create realistic blood. I warn you, it will be a bit gory, but I hope you will like it. So, a friend asked me to do this, and he sent me this photograph. His name is Balázs Bíró, and he's a Hungarian photographer, and this is one of his photographs of a DJ. So, we need to create the blood crying effect, and I would like to show you the final result. It will be this one, what I will show you how to create, but I would like to also show you another version, the first version that I created quickly, and I think that was just too much. I made only one eye and I thought, yeah, it's too gory, it's too much. And as usual in any kind of design, less is more. If you try to find the most realistic effect, you need to think of in 3 dimensions. So you need to find how blood will drip from the eyes. And also you need to find the lighting conditions on the photograph. So try to capture where light comes from. You can see this photograph is lit from below. So the highlights should be here on these parts of the blood. And it is always useful to see a reference. And I found this image on the internet. So I just put it here on the top and I use it as a reference, and I will use colors from this image when I start painting. Now, instead of using a brush, I will use just simply a hard edge default brush of Photoshop. I'm not really keen on using brushes or being dependent on brushes, because I think nearly everything can be done by the simple basic brushes of Photoshop. Of course, they are useful in some cases, but for example here, again, it is better to use the default brush and try to concentrate on highlights and shadows and the shape and form of the blood. So check out my group for version 1. I have first a multiply layer with just a simple drawing with the brush. Then I use the same layer and I set that to overlay to give a bit more depth to the blood. And then I just simply use another layer in normal blend mode, and I call that shadows and highlights. And on that layer I just simply draw with my brush. At the end I also use the blur tool on the blood just to make it a little bit more realistic and don't have it too sharp, because then it won't fit the photograph. As you can see, the focus is on the nose and the lips, but here in this part we get a bit out of focus, and we need to follow that with the blood. So now I just turn off this group, and I will try to do this here in the tutorial. So I create a new layer and I will use my brush tool, make it a little bit larger. I use a keyboard shortcut to do this, Control and Alt on Mac, and then click and drag right and left to change the brush size, and up and down to change the hardness. So I will use a hard edge brush like this, maybe a little bit soft, just make it a little bit soft like that. Okay, then I alt click on this image to sample a color for the blood, for the base of the blood like this, and then I start drawing. I will use 40% for opacity of the brush, and I just simply draw like this. Maybe it's better to follow this line under the eye and just start to draw from this point like this, and at the end I will leave a larger drop of blood like this. I do the same here on the right. Try to follow again the shape, and at the end I create a larger drop again, something like this. Now I set this to multiply, and then I duplicate this layer and I set that to overlay. Okay, so we see the texture of the skin beneath this, but we still need to make volume for the blood. So for that I will create a new layer on top of these layers, and that will be my highlights and shadows layer. So I switch back to my brush tool and I sample again from the blood here from the image on the top, and that's nearly a completely black color, and I will use that to add volume here on the bottom. I start drawing the volume like this, and I try to concentrate on the edges with this darker color, and I also will use it here on the top where we need shadow as well from that part from the top. The headphones will add shadow on the blood. So again I will use the same brush and color here on the right, and I try to build up the volume, something like this. And I always bear in mind that the lights are coming from below. Now I switch to white, so I just pressed X from my keyboard and I switched to white, and I start adding the highlights on the blood. So highlights should be somewhere here as well. I try to follow again the shape of his face, like this. That we don't need any highlights. Okay, maybe a little bit more highlight here. That's it. Now if we zoom further away, it's kind of okay, but we still need to blur these a little bit together. For that I can use on a separate layer the mixer brush tool just to draw over these parts a little bit and to wash them together, the colors, or blend the colors a little bit together like this. And I also want to draw over the main colors, and I would like to desaturate them a little bit. So I will use the sponge tool with the desaturate option, and on one of the layers I just quickly draw over these colors like this. I can even use on the other layer the hue saturation blend mode, and I just a bit reduce the saturation like that. And then I will select my blur tool, and on the top layer where I drew these highlights and shadows, I will use the blur tool only on that layer, and I just blur out these details a bit. Maybe on another layer as well, I just blur out those details a little bit, maybe more here on the top, just blur them out, and that also gets a little red near the parts of the drop, and that it just looks like the red color of the blood reflected on the skin if you blur it out like this. Of course you need to be careful not to overdo this, but it gives a little depth again to the painting. Now if you still feel that it's too much, now I turn off my reference image. If you still feel that it's too much, then you can reduce the opacity of one layer like that. Even we can reduce the opacity of this layer on the top, and even the layer at the bottom. And you can play with the opacity, because you don't need all these drawings on 100%. Maybe if I reduce them around 50, as you can see, I use one on 76, I use the other one on 46, and the other one on 57. It's much better and much more realistic. By the way, I changed the opacity by clicking on the opacity and dragging it left to right. In that case, I don't need to click twice, only once. It's much faster. Of course, you can use the keyboard shortcuts to change the opacity, but this is the way I prefer to do it. So once again, we can put these layers together into one group. I don't want to merge them because then I lose some of the details of the blending. So I will call this now version 3, and we can check version 1. Yeah, it's a bit more dark. This is more vibrant that I draw here now on the tutorial. And we also have this version where I think it's too much, but it's interesting as well. I used the same technique, but I went a bit too far, I think, on that version. So you can decide whether you want to have darker colors. Of course, then you use darker colors, or just simply go back to one of the layers and use hue saturation or curves and just turn down the lightness like this, and then you get a darker color on the blood drop. So again, this is what I created first, and this is what I created now for the tutorial. But the technique, you can see the technique, it works like this, and I hope you enjoyed it. Try not to make too scary images and draw blood on all your friends' faces, and don't blame me if you lose your friends. Okay, so thank you very much for your attention. Hope you like it, and I will try to show you other interesting stuff that I'm working on this blog. So keep in touch, join the page on Facebook and Twitter, and see you next time.